This is the second part of a two-part episode. If you haven't watched or listened to the first part, you should go back and check it out. There's a link in the description. Celeste Beard was on her fourth husband, a wealthy retired television executive named Stephen Beard. It was clear that her goal was to marry him, expecting him to die sooner than later and leave her a rich woman. Of course, she couldn't wait to spend his money, and after a number of spending indiscretions, Steve started talking to his lawyer about divorce. Now, the way their marriage had been set up, if the couple divorced, Celeste would walk away with nothing. So, as an immediate distraction from divorce, Celeste held a gun to her own head and threatened suicide. The plan worked, and soon Steve was more concerned with getting his wife the help she so clearly needed than kicking her to the curb. The part of Stephen that cared about Celeste more than he cared about money was what would ultimately get him killed. This is Monsters. After Celeste held a gun to her head, authorities had taken her for treatment at St. David's Pavilion. After experiencing auditory hallucinations after having been abused as a child, Tracy Tarlton was also admitted to the same facility. There was a noticeable contrast between the two patients, though. Tracy needed the help she was receiving and was actively trying to get better. Celeste didn't seem interested in using the hospital's services as they were intended. In the hospital, Celeste treated the facility more like a vacation getaway than a place where she could get mental health treatment. She ordered the staff around and broke the rules. She refused to eat the hospital food, and her family had to bring her every meal. She was one of the only patients who was paying out of pocket for her stay instead of it coming from insurance, so she viewed the hospital stay as something she had purchased. St. David's wasn't a long-term treatment facility, though. It was an emergency hospital where the goal was to get the most severe conditions under enough control for the patient to transfer to a long-term facility. That didn't seem to be an interest of Celeste, though. Once at the hospital, it was like she had never held a gun to her own head. Once she met Tracy, she began telling her that Steve was overbearing and abusive, and that was what caused her depression. Tracy would describe how Celeste immediately started flirting with her when they first met, but of course, Celeste tells a different story. Celeste would go on to say that she was never more than friends with Tracy and that she never realized that Tracy had developed feelings for her. Even when her daughters described walking in on them engaging in sexual activity, she would claim it wasn't true. There were also notes written back and forth between Tracy and Celeste where Tracy outright says that she was sexually attracted to Celeste. Then there were the photos from a party where Celeste is sitting on Tracy's lap, and people from the party said they saw the two kiss multiple times. Everything that came out of Celeste's mouth was a lie, so it's not surprising that she was just manipulating Tracy into a relationship in an effort to use her. Celeste didn't allow anyone into her life unless she thought it could benefit her in some way. Of course, everyone would soon learn what that use would be: to kill Steve. Celeste would continue describing Steve as abusive and controlling, something everyone else knew was absolutely not true. She had most of the luxuries she did because of his lack of control. Celeste told Tracy that Steve would never let her go, which again, everyone else knew wasn't true. He was in the process of divorcing her when she was admitted to the hospital. As far as Tracy knew, though, Steve had a solid grasp on Celeste, and she would only be freed once he died. And to add urgency to the situation, Celeste declared that if it didn't happen soon, she would just kill herself instead. Celeste planted that false narrative in Tracy's head over the course of 2 weeks, and then Tracy was sent to the Menninger Clinic near Topeka, Kansas, and Celeste was released back home. It wasn't long before Christina found her mother unresponsive, and Celeste was taken to the hospital to have her stomach pumped. Then she was readmitted to St. David. She was only there for a few days that time and was released again. Celeste suggested to her outpatient psychiatrist that she should be placed in a long-term facility, and Steve was in agreement. They found a facility outside of Dallas called Timberlawn, and Steve began making arrangements for her to begin treatment. Celeste called Tracy and told her of her plan, and Tracy began talking to her doctors about transferring to Timberlawn. She would have to pay for transportation to the facility and to have an escort from Menninger to go with her, so Celeste called a travel agency and paid for the tickets with Steve's credit card. Once they were both in the facility, they were given the same room and the women were free to explore their relationship. Again, Celeste would claim that they were never more than friends, but Tracy would describe that they began kissing as soon as the door to their room was shut. The first night there, a nurse walked into their room and found Celeste with her shirt off and Tracy was rubbing her back. They were warned that patients weren't allowed excessive touching, and the women explained it away as a back massage. From then on, Tracy said they became more careful. While there, Tracy was serious about the treatment and truly wanted to get better. Other patients would say that Celeste demanded special treatment from the staff and refused to participate in group sessions. When Jennifer and Christina would visit each Friday, she would order them to go pick up gifts for her to give to other patients or to smuggle in contraband. Then she would scream that they didn't love her. In April of 1999, Tracy's insurance was running out and she would have to leave Timberlawn. She left the facility first, and so Celeste began telling her therapist that she was getting better. That got her sent back home shortly after. The bookstore where Tracy worked had held her job for her, and once she was back, she continued working while seeing Celeste. Celeste was openly affectionate with Tracy when they were around her coworkers, and she had no issue telling them all how much she disliked Steve. She would call him fat and tell people that he was controlling. But when she was away from Tracy, it wasn't Steve she would talk shit about. To others, she would make fun of Tracy, once saying, quote, "That dyke is in love with me." There was not a single person who came into Celeste's life that she was honest with. Every single person, including her own children, were considered idiots that she was just using. It had gotten to the point that, when Jennifer started working part-time, she would deposit all of her money into a secret account because she didn't trust her mother. Celeste spent the next few months juggling Steve, Tracy, and Jimmy. She used each one to meet a need. Steve for money, Tracy for devotion, and Jimmy for sex. As far as Steve knew, Tracy was a friend she had made at St. David's, and he was under the impression that her affair with Jimmy had ended. Of course, Steve had been away from his wife for 6 months while she was in the hospital, so he went to a travel agent and set up a month-long dream vacation across Europe. From Scotland to Italy, with many stops in between, Steve was going to take Celeste on a romantic trip so they could spend some quality time together. It came to a grand total of $53,000 and included stays in the most luxurious hotels, meals at the finest restaurants, and travel in only first-class accommodations. Steve was thrilled about the trip, and of course, Celeste played along, but inside she was overtaken with dread. Before that vacation happened, there was a little foreshadowing with a family road trip to Washington State. Steve, Celeste, Jennifer and her boyfriend Christopher, and Christina and her boyfriend Justin. They all drove a brand new Chevy Suburban decked out with all the bells and whistles from Texas up north. Steve wore an oxygen mask while they were traveling at higher altitudes, but whenever he fell asleep, Celeste would turn it off. She threw out his asthma medication and gave him sleeping pills in their place. Anytime they stopped to eat, she would grind up sleeping pills and add them to his food. She was clearly hoping that he would end up dying in his sleep while they drove. That didn't happen, but he was so concerned about how much he was sleeping that he called his doctor, who told him he should return home. He caught a flight in Seattle, and Celeste and the teens completed the trip without him. The teens and their boyfriend said that as soon as they got back in the car, Celeste screamed, quote, "The fat old man is gone. Now we can make some time." She was apparently not happy that Steve preferred to drive the speed limit. The purpose of the trip was to go to a storage shed that had belonged to Craig so the girls could collect mementos, but she only gave them a few minutes to look. Then she gave the keys to one of Craig's friends and said he could have it all. They went as far north as Victoria, British Columbia, before returning to Texas. When they were home, Celeste was all smiles and asked Steve how he felt. He told her he was much better and blamed his condition on higher elevation. It wasn't long, though, before Celeste disappeared so she could visit Tracy. There were only a few days between when Celeste returned from her trip to the Northwest and when she was scheduled to take the twins on a trip to Australia to celebrate their high school graduation. Celeste had asked Tracy to order her a book titled The Poisoner's Handbook. Subtle. It had arrived while she was on her road trip, and when Tracy tried to give it to her, Celeste told her to keep it. She wanted Tracy to use a recipe in the book to make botulism and was planning to use it to poison Steve when she got back from Australia. Tracy protested at first, but Celeste had a way of getting people to do what she wanted, and eventually Tracy agreed. She attempted to grow the poison in a jar and then gave some of it to 3 mice she had purchased at a pet store. Unfortunately for Celeste, but fortunately for the mice, it didn't work. The mice remained alive. Once back from Australia, Celeste took the jar, mixed the contents into some chili, and fed it to Steve, but he suffered no ill effects. A few months later, Celeste and Tracy tried to brew up another jar of botulism, but the jar was disturbed at some point and the contents were ruined. With the trip to Europe coming up fast, Celeste started to panic. She spent a lot of time watching crime shows and making notes. One evening, she drugged Steve and called Tracy to come over after he had passed out. She put a towel around his neck and then tightened a garbage bag over his head. She said that the towel would keep him from having marks from the bag. She told Tracy to keep the bag tight, but she said she couldn't do it. Celeste was not willing to do her own dirty work, so she put the garbage bag away and called 911. She claimed that Steve had had a seizure. That gave her a couple of days away from him while he was in the hospital. On September 29th, Steve and Celeste were scheduled to leave on their vacation in 5 days, and Celeste was desperate. Celeste knew that Tracy still had a shotgun that her father had given her when she was young. She told Tracy that Steve had been pushing her to commit suicide and that she knew that she would never come back from Europe. She told Tracy that she needed to shoot Steve. She said it was the only way they could be together. She ultimately gave her a choice. Either she killed Steve or Celeste was going to kill herself. Celeste knew exactly what she was doing. She knew the right buttons to push and the right emotions to play off of in order to get Tracy to agree, which she finally did. Of course, Celeste would claim that she had no idea what Tracy was going to do. It's a claim she maintains to this day, and you can read all about it in her biography. It's a fascinating read, but I will warn you ahead of time there's absolutely no truth to it. The people who put their names on it as the authors, passing it off as the truth, really should be ashamed of themselves. In the book, Celeste describes how she helped plan the trip to Europe and how she was happy to go. Of course, in real life, Celeste went to the travel agent alone and paid for travel insurance without Steve's knowledge. That insurance made her able to get the money back from the trip in the event that they had to cancel. The travel agent asked Steve multiple times if he wanted the insurance and he had declined. So the woman said she was surprised when Celeste showed up and paid the premium. It was almost like she was sure they weren't going to be able to go. Celeste also made plans for Jennifer to stay at the lake house the night of Steve's planned attack. She made sure Christina stayed home that night because, as the twin who had been primarily raised by her, she knew that Christina could be manipulated into helping the plan work. Celeste had even removed the dog from the house, telling Jennifer that Steve was drunk and hitting the pooch. Jennifer would later say that she had never seen Steve hit the dog before. So, despite not having any idea that Steve was going to be shot, she had coincidentally set the house up perfectly so the plan could be carried out. Right. Celeste claimed that she had stopped sleeping in the same room as Steve because his CPAP machine kept her up, but that can't be verified anywhere else. So, in the early morning hours of October 3rd, Celeste claimed she was asleep in Jennifer's bed on the other side of the house when Tracy snuck in and shot Steve in the stomach. Steve was extremely fastidious about ensuring the doors were locked and the security system was armed, but Celeste had made sure Tracy could easily enter. Tracy would also testify that Celeste told her to shoot Steve in the stomach because she didn't want a big mess on the wall behind him. At about 3 a.m., Steve made a call to 911 telling them about his injury. When the police arrived at the house, Christina woke up and saw that her mother was already up, likely because she had never actually gone to sleep. Celeste told Christina to go downstairs and see what was going on. Christina found the deputies and saw them pulling Steve out of the house. They asked her some questions, and suddenly Celeste appeared and started screaming. Then they were taken to the hospital where Steve was rushed into surgery. Christina would describe how Celeste only cried when other people were around. As soon as they were gone, she would immediately stop. Then, of course, she told her daughter not to mention Tracy to the police. Once a deputy had found the shotgun shell, it was clear that Steve had been attacked and the scene was closed off. The initial investigation found that there were no signs of forced entry and that only one door had been unlocked, the slider going into the master bedroom. They wondered why only that door was unlocked and how the assailant would have known that it was the only unlocked door in the house. There were open drawers and closet doors, but it didn't look like the contents had really been searched. It looked very much like a staged robbery. They found 3 cars at the house, all with built-in cell phones, but one vehicle also had an additional cell phone in it. In that phone, 2 numbers were stored listed as Tracy's house and Tracy's cell. At the hospital, a detective questioned Celeste and Christina and had a technician swab their hands for gunshot residue. The tests were negative, and the detective asked if there was anyone who would want to hurt Steve. Celeste said no, which actually makes me question her declaration of innocence more. Celeste claims that she was not in a sexual relationship with Tracy and didn't plan the murder with her. So wouldn't she have perceived that Tracy was becoming obsessed with her and might be a threat to Steve? When the authorities asked if there was anyone who would want to hurt Steve, she wouldn't suggest Tracy? It feels like not mentioning Tracy to the police at all better supports her not wanting them to find out they planned the murder together. That's just me, but it also comes with testimony from her own daughters that their mother clearly was in a sexual relationship with Tracy. In order for Celeste to maintain her innocence, she's had to claim that her own daughters are intentionally lying to the authorities, which means their boyfriends are also lying. It becomes a massive conspiracy against her where a number of people are just lying in order to send her to prison, and then I have to ask myself, what's most likely? This whole conspiracy against her, which already includes verifiable lies on her part, or was she just involved? Horses, not zebras. Despite Celeste telling Christina to call Jennifer and give her the instructions not to mention Tracy, investigators got her name anyway. Christina's boyfriend Justin told the lead detective as soon as he was able to get him alone at the hospital. He didn't want Celeste to hear because he knew she had instructed the teens not to say anything. He also knew full well that Celeste and Tracy were having an affair. Once Justin spilled the beans, Christina's floodgates opened and she told the detective all about Tracy. She told him that Tracy was in love with her mother and that she had guns. Again, knowing all of that, why wouldn't Celeste offer up Tracy as a person who might have hurt Steve? To make it even worse, after learning of Tracy, the detective would question Celeste again and specifically ask if there was anyone with feelings for her that might want Steve out of the way. Celeste said no. Celeste very much did not want investigators to look into Tracy. The timing of when Christina and Justin gave information to the authorities is also important. Aside from the biography, Celeste also has a website where she posts, or has someone post, a bunch of information that supposedly proves she's innocent. It's a common overkill tactic by narcissists who think they can convince people they're innocent when they aren't. One page on the site reads, quote, "1 month after Steve's death, Celeste's twin daughters, along with their boyfriends, began a secret campaign to incriminate Celeste because they wanted the money." Now, Steve wouldn't actually die until January 22nd, so they started this alleged campaign at the end of February. Why are they telling the detective about Tracy and her relationship with Celeste way back at the beginning of October? Unlike Celeste, Jennifer and Christina actually loved Steve. He had been the only person in their lives to ever show them respect and give them stability. They wanted whoever had ended his life to be caught. It was that simple. At about 3 p.m., detectives arrived at Tracy's house and questioned her. One of the detectives noted that she didn't seem surprised when they told her that Steve had been shot. They asked her if she had any guns in the house, and she told them about the shotgun. She said she had shot Skeet a few days prior and had recently cleaned it. She gave them a signed statement that said she had met Celeste at St. David's and they had a brief affair but remained friends after it ended. She claimed that she had not shot Steve and didn't know who had. The detectives took the shotgun to be tested. They also began questioning other people in Steve's life. When a detective talked to Steve's son Paul, he immediately suggested they look into Celeste. While authorities were working to find out who had shot Steve, Celeste seemed the most concerned about money. She called the bank and told them Steve had been shot and that she needed to be put on the account so she could pay the bills. They refused, so she called Steve's cousin who handled some of his finances and left him a frantic voice message about needing access to Steve's bank account. About an hour after detectives left with Tracy's shotgun, she was sitting in her lawyer's office telling him everything about what had happened. She told him about her relationship with Celeste, the plan to kill Steve, and how she carried it out. She made it clear that she would not turn on Celeste, but that she knew the ballistics would match her shotgun and she was willing to take the fall. The lawyer offered to talk to the prosecutor about a deal if she told the full story, but Tracy refused. She said she did not want Celeste involved. A few days later, Tracy's shotgun came back a match for the shell casing found at the scene and she was placed under arrest. With a warrant to search her house, they found her journals from her time in the hospital, and it was clear that her relationship with Celeste was more significant than she had originally claimed. Despite all signs pointing to the women having worked together, Tracy refused to flip on Celeste. She seemed to be under the impression that their relationship was real and that Celeste truly loved her, but that idea would soon come crumbling down. Steve suffered a blood clot and died on January 22nd. The doctors determined that the blood clot was a result of the gunshot wound, and the attempted murder charge turned into a first-degree murder charge. It wasn't more than a few hours before Celeste was on the phone demanding access to Steve's bank accounts again. Steve's cousin had to let his children know that their father had died. Celeste didn't bother to tell them. Currently, Celeste claims that the blood clot that killed Steve was not related to his shooting, but she didn't always have that opinion. Soon after his death, she was sure that it had definitely been caused by his surgery after he was shot. It was, of course, medical malpractice, though, and she was going to sue the hospital. Not surprisingly, though, she didn't end up suing. There were no grounds. That didn't stop Celeste from trying to find money. She started dating a man who made it seem like he was loaded, but when she realized he wasn't rich, she dumped him. Tracy was out on bail, and that made Celeste paranoid. She was sure that Tracy had made a deal and was going to turn on her, so she found a woman named Donna who claimed she knew someone who could get rid of her. That's when Celeste started giving money to Donna, who was claiming to be giving it to a man called Modesto. She would regularly tell Celeste that Modesto needed more money and promised that he would take care of Tracy soon. While that was going on, Celeste heard that her regular hairdresser was telling people that she had planned the murder with Tracy, so she showed up at the salon with a knife. She ended up stabbing herself in the leg and was taken to the hospital. She was released the following day and went back to her life of trying to get access to money and trying to find a new meal ticket. Soon, she was dating a man named Cole Johnson, who had the same name as her older adopted brother. Cole was a carpenter who also tended bar on the side. Celeste was also anxious for Modesto to murder Tracy, so she would call Tracy often, checking if she was still alive. Tracy must have taken that as a sign that Celeste still cared about her, so she continued to refuse to turn on her. The irony of all of that was that Celeste was only calling because she thought she was going to turn on her, so she was trying to pay someone to kill her. Donna told Celeste that Modesto needed another $2,500 and then he would be able to complete the contract. Celeste gave it to her, and then the women drove to New Orleans for Mardi Gras as an alibi. In reality, Tracy was in no danger, because Modesto didn't exist. Celeste, the eternal leech, was being leeched off of by Donna. While they were in New Orleans, Donna made a call and claimed that Modesto had pulled out and she needed more money to hire someone else. That continued on for a while, but eventually the plan fizzled out. It wasn't the end of the story, though, because Christina ended up recording a conversation where Celeste confessed to hiring someone to kill Tracy. Of course, she hadn't actually done that. She had hired someone to hire someone to kill Tracy, and that person never had any intention of doing that. But Celeste still hadn't realized that Donna was scamming her. The twins ended up taking the recording to the prosecutor, who listened to it as well as the twins telling him everything they knew about their mother. That's the time period I'm assuming Celeste claims her daughters started their secret campaign against her. They eventually went to court and got a restraining order against Celeste. There was a very specific detail about their court case, though. On the day the judge made his ruling in the case, Celeste wasn't actually in court. He was noted in a newspaper article which Tracy had read. At the very end of the article, it mentioned that Celeste had missed the court date because she was in Aspen on her honeymoon. Tracy was under the impression that Celeste was not seeing anyone else, so to discover she had gotten married was quite a shock. It was a lie that would unravel all of the other lies Celeste had told her since they had met. She realized that Celeste did not deserve to be protected, so she made a deal to testify against her. Tracy laid all of her cards out on the table. She explained that Celeste had first suggested poisoning with botulism and how they tried to make it. Then she told them that Celeste asked her to shoot Steve. She showed her how to get in, unlocked the door, turned off the alarm, and took the dog to the lake house. Tracy was given a polygraph and she passed, so the deal was made. Celeste Beard was arrested on March 28, 2002. What happened after that is one giant conspiracy against her, according to Celeste. She claimed that Tracy made up a story about her because she was jealous that she had remarried, but that was unlikely. Tracy had told her lawyer all about Celeste's involvement when she had first met with him, while she was still unwilling to turn on Celeste. Celeste Beard Johnson was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of 40 years. She will be eligible for parole in 2042. Tracy Tarlton was sentenced to 10 years in prison and was paroled in 2011. After Celeste's conviction, author Catherine Casey interviewed her in prison. She said that she thought her daughters were like the Menendez brothers and that they deserved to be in prison, not her. She claimed that Christina had worked with the prosecutor to manufacture evidence against her. She also claimed that a man named Robert had sent a letter to her lawyer saying he had seen Tracy in a Sears department store talking to Christina and her boyfriend Justin. That was apparently proof of her innocence. When Catherine pressed for more details, Celeste changed her story to say Robert didn't know for sure it was Christina and Justin, just that it looked like them. She also couldn't provide Robert's last name. Celeste talked about parts of the trial, which were thoroughly documented, but she lied about the details. When Catherine called her out on her lies, Celeste yelled at her that she was in the pocket of, quote, the evil twins. That's the true Celeste Beard Johnson. Despite the things she says about how much she loves her daughters on her website, her actions show that all she sees them as are scapegoats. To this day, Celeste maintains her innocence, and if she's to be believed, then a massive conspiracy was undertaken in order to get her wrongfully convicted. Of course, her own daughters would have to lie as well as their boyfriends. It seems unlikely that they would, but according to Celeste, they wanted Steve's money. As someone with a long history of using people for their money, to throw your own children under the bus claiming they betrayed you for money is really despicable. Of course, there were other people who would have had to lie about Celeste. Family friends who benefited in no way from painting her as a murderer. People who only had a professional relationship with her. Dozens of people, many of whom would gain nothing, would have to work together to create this total conspiracy about Celeste. This is the way circumstantial evidence works. Either she's guilty or you have to believe that she is the unluckiest person in the world. A large amount of unlikely coincidences all happen to have come to fruition around her. Then you read her biography and it's even worse. Her entire life, every single thing that she did that others labeled as bad was actually someone else's fault, and she was actually the victim. On her website, she claims she's not allowed to file in federal court, and it's because her lawyer filed a petition 4 days too late. She's always a victim. But I believe she's much more of an opportunist, so if she becomes eligible for parole, don't be surprised when she suddenly decides to admit guilt and show remorse. People who don't accept responsibility for their crimes generally don't get parole. So what do you think? Will she be too stubborn to admit guilt, or will she make a sudden confession to get parole? I think either way, it makes her even more of a monster. There is so much more to this case than even I was able to put into my video. I wanted the story to be thorough and accurate, but I didn't want it to become confusing. If you want to read the entire twisted tale of Celeste's life, I recommend the book She Wanted It All by Catherine Casey. If you're a fan of true crime, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. You can also hit like or leave us a comment. You can check out our other show, Somewhere Sinister, on YouTube or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to support the show, check out our merchandise at thisismonsters.com. The link is in the description. Thanks again, and be safe.